Welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Caleb Ontiveros,
And I'm Michael Tremblay.
and today we're going to be talking about a key Stoic concept and how it's often misunderstood. We're going to be talking about the dichotomy of control.
Yeah, and I wanted to, for this episode, I wanted to even push a bit further than that, which is I think that many people, the dichotomy of control is one of the first things they learn about when they learn about Stoicism. That's that fundamental division that Epictetus makes between the things that are up to us and not up to us, and that we should pay attention and care about the things that are up to us and practice some form of detachment or change the way we treat the things not up to us. Um, I want to say that actually, not only do people misunderstand the dichotomy of control, but I think that it's one of the first things people learn. And when they often have either no philosophical background or very little understanding of Stoicism. And so when they learn it, they misunderstand it. And then it actually, that misunderstanding informs the way people look at other parts of Stoicism. So really this idea actually that people misunderstand Stoicism because they misunderstand the dichotomy of control. Not just they get the dichotomy of control wrong, but it actually changes the entire way lots of people look at Stoicism because they think, well, this is what the Stoics believe. Insert misunderstanding of the dichotomy of control. Therefore, ABC, and it's actually incorrect quite a ways down. So what I wanted to do this episode, in order from the least complex to the most complex arguments or misunderstandings, go through this is a simple misunderstanding to actually this is a pretty complex idea, but it still roots, I think, in a misunderstanding of the dichotomy of control. And so I'm going to go through four of those, which I think is fun. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, about how Stoicism focuses a lot on this idea of the progressor, this idea that we change over time. And I think the strength of the dichotomy of control is that it's so simple, it's so intuitive, it's so appealing, but that strength becomes its weakness because if I tell you, if you're new to Stoicism and I talked about the idea of oikiosis, that doesn't mean anything to you. And so it has to be explained, it has to be contextualized, but you could tell, I could tell my parents, I could tell somebody down the street, like, hey, you should focus on the things that are up to you. And they're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. And on one hand, it's immediately helpful. But on the other hand, it's often grafts onto their own understanding of the world, of control, of which things fall into that bucket versus don't. And so that's the focus of today's episode. Let's clarify the dichotomy of control, and in doing so, kind of resolve these misunderstandings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something we've talked about before, how the dichotomy of control is a simple idea and on the surface, but you can dive deep into it. I think by exploring it some more, it unlocks a lot of Stoicism, and it's a sort of kind of idea that can be immediately useful to someone. And as you learn more about Stoicism, it can become more useful, and you sort of uncover its depth. But I think there's a difference between finding the idea useful, learning more about it, how the dichotomy of control relates to Stoic ideas of identity, uh, versus just straightforwardly misunderstanding the idea. And my sense is we're going to be talking about some misunderstanding, just a straightforward misunderstanding of the idea in this episode. And it's and some of these, I think it's not just people who encounter Stoicism and they're I suppose lay people or sort, but some of these misunderstandings I think you can see even in some academics or people popularizing Stoicism. So I think they're important to
Yeah.
clarify.
Yeah. Some of them are more complicated. At a high level, the four we're going to go through. First is the passivity argument. This is the idea that Stoicism argues for passivity, that you shouldn't respond to injustice or anything like this. The second is that the Stoics think we have too much control, or that they have kind of unrealistic ideas around human behavior, that we should be able to just immediately stop being angry. The third idea is the so-called trichotomy of control, where people try to introduce this idea of influence as the third bucket, So you've got the things you control, the things you have imperfect control over or influence, and then the things you have no control over. And then the fourth idea is that the Stoics cannot be determinists. They have to believe in free will in a way that makes determinism impossible, because otherwise, how could you control your behavior? How could your behavior be up to you if determinism was true, if things were predetermined? Anything else, anything you want to say about those before we jump into it?
No, I think that's a solid list. Let's do it.
Cool. So to kick things off, I'm going to read through the Dichotomy of Control, the passage. This is Epictetus's Handbook, Part 1, Chapter 1. And I think it's worth returning to just to ground ourselves in the text. And what are we actually talking about here? So Arian, writing for Epictetus, says, some things are up to us and others are not. Up to us are opinion, impulse, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is our own action. Not up to us are body, property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not our own action. The things that are up to us are by nature free, unhindered, and unimpeded. But those that are not up to us are weak, servile, subject to hindrance, and not our own. Remember then that if you suppose what is naturally enslaved to be free, and what is not your own to be your own, you'll be hampered, you will lament, you'll be disturbed, you'll find fault with both gods and men. But if you suppose only what is your own to be your own, and what is not your own not to be your own, as is indeed the case, no one will ever coerce you, no one will hinder you, you'll find fault with no one, you'll accuse no one, you will not do a single thing against your will, you'll have no enemy, and no one will harm you, because no harm can affect you. So at a high level, the way I like to talk about this, there's a kind of a descriptive claim about reality. Things fall into two buckets. There are the things that are up to you and the things that are not up to you. And we can always make descriptive claims. I can make a descriptive claim about anything. I can say, everything out there is either pink or not pink, or something like this. All people are named Michael or not Michael. Then there's this actual, mandate then, which is like, you've got to live well. You've got to understand this division. You've got to correctly apply this division. And if you don't do that, you're going to live poorly. And a lot of your struggle, your lamenting, your frustration, your anger, your jealousy, a lot of that comes down to actually getting this distinction wrong. And so Epictetus adds later on in part 1 of the handbook, practice then from the start to say to every harsh impression, you're an impression, and not at all the thing you appear to be. Then examine it and test it by these rules which you have, and first and chiefly by this, whether the impression has to do with things which are up to us or those which are not. And if it has to do with the things that are not up to us, be ready to reply, it is nothing to me. And so there you get the behavioral guide. What do I do with this information? Well, you examine your impressions, you reflect on those impressions, you clarify, the thing that has happened to you. Someone insulted you. Someone was talking bad behind your back. Somebody else just got a promotion that you wanted or got something that you want and you're feeling jealous. You think about that and you say, well, is that up to me or not up to me? And if it's not up to me, you say it's nothing to me. You practice this kind of detachment from it. Lots of other implications about how we put the dichotomy of control into practice, but I would say that's it at a high level, or at its simplest, the core of the idea. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's well put. Also worth flagging perhaps that other translations might use terms like what's in your power, or will often talk about, what's up to you. And I think it can be useful to keep those phrases in the back of your mind as well if the term control is causing issues or is in some way unclear.
Yeah, so that's the maybe where a lot of these misunderstandings we're about to talk about come down to, the one point about control and versus up to us or in our power. This is something we talked about before on the show, but the phrase control, it comes from William Irvine's A Guide to a Good Life, which is an early 2000s book. And my position on this is that I'm fine with using it, but we just have to be careful around the nuance that when we say control in the English language, it's not really what Epictetus meant. Epictetus meant what was up to us. And that has to do more with this notion. I mean, we'll get into it as we go through these examples, but it has to do with more with this notion of what are the things that you're causing, what are the things that you're responsible for, which is a subtle difference. And because when we evoke control, we often think about total ability to determine in the moment. And that's not what Epictetus is saying. When he's saying, Epictetus would say your anger is up to you. And that doesn't mean you have a total ability to control your anger. The Stoics actively didn't think that. That's what made anger so dangerous, is that once you were angry, you kind of couldn't stop it. But your anger depends upon you. It's up to you. It's a result of your character. And so that's the thing that you should focus on. That's the thing that you should be thinking about when you get angry. Is like, okay, well, what about my character, my choices, or my decisions led to this reaction, instead of, well, what did they do? What did they do that made me angry? Which are the things that are not up to you. So yeah, important distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, so let's jump into these misunderstandings.
Great. So the first one, I mean, I think you laid it out well at the start, Caleb, where some of these have a lay person would come into, and some of these are more complex. Even people practicing Stoicism or popularizing Stoicism, I think, get them wrong. So this first one, I think, is a bit of a lay argument. So when somebody hears the dichotomy of control, they either have this first reaction, which is like, wow, that's like super empowering. That's giving me this kind of focus that lets me, tells me what I should be worrying about in a situation, which is I should be worrying about me. I should be worrying about what I'm doing. There's a lot that's empowering about that. But somebody else might hear that and go, oh, that's kind of like, it's kind of putting a lot of emphasis on the individual, and it's kind of missing out on the fact that there are all of these bad things going on in the world, or all of these kind of harmful things going on in the world, that we want to focus on those. We want to stop those. And I call this the passivity argument, which is this idea that the misunderstanding is that Stoicism argues for passivity. And I think this comes down to a misunderstanding of the dichotomy of control. But so when they hear the dichotomy of control, they think it's like, well, we shouldn't focus on things that are outside of our control. As Epictetus says, it's nothing to me. Mm-hmm. So, if we get insulted, we shouldn't do anything. If somebody is starving, we shouldn't help them. If there's injustice, we shouldn't correct it. If we see somebody getting attacked, we shouldn't stop it. If somebody's attacking us, well, we just need to learn how to put up with it. It's kind of like a blame the victim type argument. It teaches you how to be a punching bag. It teaches you how to suffer better. Experience bad things with maybe a little bit less suffering, but it makes you totally passive. Somebody with this view would look at, there's the Stockdale, who was the prisoner of war in the Vietnam War, who was also had a master's in philosophy and used Stoicism to get through the prisoner of war camp. Really, still mentally sane through that experience. And they would say, yeah, great. Give me Stoicism if I'm a prisoner of war getting suffering. And there's nothing that I can do except think about my own reactions to this torture. But totally silly way to think about the world when you have the ability to go out and influence things and do things and act in the world. So that's the passivity argument. And so I think this comes down to a misunderstanding of the dichotomy of control. This might be, if you've been listening to Stoicism for a while, listening to this podcast, the misunderstanding might be obvious, but it still occurs all the time, which is that Stoicism teaches you to focus on the things up to you, and how you respond to a situation is up to you. How you act in the world, how you go about approaching, injustice, how you go about approaching the suffering of others, how you establish boundaries with the people who are, harassing you or coming after you. Those are all the things that are up to you. So the Stoic argument would be that the Stoic is actually better equipped to be genuinely active out in the world and to go out and to navigate the external world successfully, because they're focused just on their character and they're focused on their responses. They're not greedy for wealth, right? Like, they're not afraid of imprisonment or being ostracized. I think of this example all the time where there's a bully, and they're picking on somebody else. And it's like, what's stopping somebody from intervening? Usually either they're afraid of getting bullied or they're afraid of losing their social position if that bully's popular. And the Stoic argument would be like, well, actually the Stoic is in the best position to intervene because they're not worried about getting bullied. They're not worried about, or they don't fear getting bullied in the same way. They
Hmm.
don't fear being socially ostracized in the same way a regular person does or a non-Stoic does. So that's the Stoic position, and that just, I think, comes down to misunderstanding of dichotomy of control. They think focus on the things up to you means like, become solipsistic, become almost like a socially a separate from society, and that's just not what the Stoics think at all. It's saying things, well, you've got to do well, you've got to flourish in society, and what are the steps you can take to ensure that? What are the things you can focus on to do that well?
Yeah, I think it's related to another misunderstanding we'll talk about where people think about control as influence, and they think, okay, well, I need to focus on what I can influence, which is a good heuristic, but it's not the same thing as the dichotomy of control. So, an example of that is I remember talking to someone who knew a little bit about Stoicism, and they were thinking about whether they wanted to continue working for a nonprofit in Ukraine or take a standard corporate job. And one of the remarks he made was, I think I might let go of this nonprofit in Ukraine opportunity because, as a Stoic say, I can't really control that situation. That's just sort of out of my hands, which is another way I think of saying, can't a single person can't influence the outcome of that, geopolitical situation, which is of course correct. And there's um, a kind of use in that obvious insight, I suppose, but in a way, it could be misusing the dichotomy of control in the sense that of
Hmm.
of course, how much influence you have matters for making decisions, but it's not the economy of control isn't something you can use to rationalize just focusing your
Yeah.
attention on what you can perfectly influence. And I can't say whether this person should have remained in, doing nonprofit work in Ukraine or not, but I think that kind of reasoning is a little bit of suspect and is probably grounded in a misunderstanding of the dichotomy of control.
Yeah. So the to phrase that a bit differently, I've been arguing the passivity argument is something that people that don't like Stoicism use to criticize Stoicism. And there's this version here that you've put forward, that it's people practicing Stoicism incorrectly will use the passivity argument or some version of it to say, well, the dichotomy of control gives me permission to, not unless it's something that I can immediately have strong influence over, then I don't really have to worry about it. Which is kind of or I don't have any sort of, obligation or responsibility for it, which is another misunderstanding. It's kind of a different way of thinking about passivity, um,
Well, it's sort of
but also incorrect.
the same way, I suppose. It's just taking the objection someone has of stoicism and I suppose applying it in
Being
my
it,
mind
yeah.
is, yeah,
Being the kind of person the outside criticizer would criticize,
yeah,
Stoicism is making you.
yeah, I think
Um,
so.
yeah. And so that's one. There's just, if if you're still wrestling with this yourself, I mean, it's just not what Stoicism argues for. Stoicism also makes these kinds of claims that, we've got certain social obligations. It's not cynicism; it's about integrating into your community as well. So it just doesn't really, it's not really backed up by what the Stoics say. The other misunderstanding I think that I see in people practicing Stoicism, less than an external criticism, but something that people practicing Stoicism run into, is they think that Stoicism says you have more control over your life than Stoicism actually says you do. So this is the view. I describe this as too much control. This is the view that the dichotomy of control teaches us that we can control our responses. So Stoicism thinks we should be able to control our behavior always. We should be able to choose not to be angry or immediately remove grief, or not desire the things we desire. Because I read Epictetus a couple times, and I've learned that virtue is the only good, or I've read Marcus Aurelius, and he says that I shouldn't be concerned about what other people think, and so now I can just snap my fingers. And Stoicism is just I notice an impression, I tell myself that impression isn't true, and I move on, and that's it. The issue with this kind of misunderstanding, this too much control view, is I think it leads to kind of a fork in the road. On one hand, it's just not true. We just can't do that. We can't snap our fingers and not be angry or not grieve or not want the things we want immediately, or fear the things we fear. And so people run into a fork in the road where they either reject Stoicism and say, well, the dichotomy of control doesn't make any sense. I tried to put it into practice and it didn't work. Or they embrace Stoicism and they think, well, I really suck at Stoicism. I can't. Epictetus has said this fact about human life, and I can't live up to it. I'm not being a good Stoic because I'm still feeling angry or frustrated about this thing, and I'm failing as a Stoic somehow. The truth of the matter is that Stoicism teaches us that our actions and emotions are up to us, but not in our control. This was the distinction we made at the start of the episode. So it's not in our control if we define control as something we can immediately determine. So our anger is up to us because we're responsible for producing it. But once it's started, we don't have control over it. It's not something we can immediately stop. And that's why, as I said before, the Stoics thought the passions were dangerous. They were dangerous because they had momentum, they would talk about. It's like falling off a cliff or racing downhill. Once it starts, you can't stop yourself. Like even Epictetus is explicit about this self. You get angry, you can't stop being angry. You can't choose to not be angry. That's why you have to be really careful about getting angry. This means that we aren't failing if we have emotional issues, despite agreeing with Stoicism, where self-improvement is a craft, it's a skill. Character is something you refine and change over time. You digest Stoic ideas. That's another metaphor Seneca uses, Epictetus uses. It takes a while to actually integrate Stoic principles into your life, even if you agree with them and you're practicing them. And so if you fail in the moment, that's not a failure of Stoicism. You just haven't hit that. You just haven't hit that level yet. You just haven't got that good in your practice. And the one other example, we've talked about this before, but just to wrap our head around that up to us example. So I think this is Chrysippus' example of the cylinder versus the cube. And he gives the example where, I've got two shapes. One's a cube, one's a cylinder. If I push the cylinder, it's going to roll. If I push the cube, it's going to maybe slightly move and then immediately stop. But the cylinder is going to keep moving. And he's saying the point of that metaphor is that the external stimulus is the same. The impression is the same. It's a push, but the reaction is different. And so what's the difference in the reaction? Well, it's the shape. And the shape is a metaphor for your character. So I insult one person, they get angry. I insult another person, they laugh it off. What was the cause of the anger? It wasn't the insult. It was your character, how your beliefs about, how damaging or important that insult was to your well-being. And that's what the Stoics are saying is up to you. And that's the Stoic path, is to kind of craft and refine those beliefs and that character. And that's how it can be up to you and something you're responsible for changing over time, but not immediately in your control.
Yeah, absolutely. One of Seneca's phrases about anger that stuck with me is that anger is that which overleaps reason and carries it away, which perfectly captures that idea of passion, a negative emotion as a passion, something that consumes oneself, changes how one views the world, and means as a result that you can't simply change your behavior when you're in that kind of state. Now that doesn't mean you're not accountable for it, but clearly I think, as you've just explained, there's the issue in the moment when you're feeling a passion. Can you change? The Stoics say no. And then there's, of course, just the realistic assessment you need to make as a part of your self-improvement work, or as a part of, the work of life, that you're not going to, reach that sage level immediately. Of course, you should expect mistakes just given who you are and, what you're bringing to every experience. So and all of us should expect mistakes in that way. So I certainly think this is a misunderstanding. Nonetheless, I would say Stoicism, on the margin, it does, perhaps compared to other philosophies, it does emphasize the aspect that no, radical change, self transformation is possible. You can make progress against your vices, and that's something that it is really up to you, and is
Yeah.
something one can do. So I would say there is a kind of profound radical agency behind Stoicism, and that's something that has always attracted uh, me to the philosophy. And so, but, I wouldn't want to underrate that.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some mindfulness descriptions that talk about anger as, anger has kind of emerged. It's something you can see or is occurring. You kind of observe it, then you let it go. Because it's not you. You're not the anger. It's just this thing. It's something that's um, occurring, or you're not that thought. I mean, the Stoics aren't gonna like the Stoics are gonna say you are your beliefs. You are the way that you think. You're responsible for that anger. You're accountable for it. You should feel guilty for it. I mean, I don't know, maybe guilty isn't the right word, but you should take accountability for it, responsibility for it, apologize for it. Um, and it's something that you can eliminate and fix. It is up to you to fix. I just don't. I mean, I don't know, Caleb. Maybe you didn't have these moments, but I've had these moments of just, why isn't my stoicism helping me? Why can't I just kind of rationally grit my way through this sensation? And it's just because it's a longer term craft than just something you can do in the moment. And the
Mm-hmm.
Stoics acknowledge that, as you said, by overleaping reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the project of Stoicism as a whole is like practicing any skill or craft. It takes time, it takes practice, and that's essential. Um, and there is something to the thought that maybe you can make more progress than you imagine, but obviously that progress, no matter who you are, is going to come with setbacks, and it's going to take time. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that's that's absolutely correct. And I have seen people make mistakes, a kind of mistake where they think maybe the dichotomy of control means that either they or other people can just control their behavior immediately in the moment, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not so. That's not always so.
Yep. I mean, I've done it. And so the next one that I wanted to talk about is the trichotomy of control. That's not something we ever really talk about. It's something that I see out in the wild, especially in the less intense stoicism space. And it's a I think it's an interesting one because it was introduced by William Irvine in his book A Guide to the Good Life, which was a book on Stoic philosophy. He's admitted, well, not admitted, he's not confessing. He's been explicit about the fact that he's not a Stoic expert. He was a philosopher, but not of Stoicism. Got interested in Stoicism, was writing about it kind of as he went along his own journey. That's the same kind of thing that Massimo Pigliucci has done as well. Very smart, educated people engaging with Stoicism and then kind of wrestling it with it as a philosophy of life. And so the trichotomy of control is something introduced by William Irvine in the book, and he says, well, maybe we could actually improve the dichotomy of control and turn it into a trichotomy. And we could make it into these three buckets where you've got the things you perfectly control, the things you influence, and the things that you have no control or influence over. And he said that's an important distinction. It's actually a kind of response to the passivity argument, or a way to resolve the passivity argument. So it's that you should be passive. It's going to rain tomorrow. You need to be passive about the fact that it's going to rain tomorrow. Like if you're angry at the rain, it's like a ridiculous disposition. That's that kind of no influence bucket. I cannot change the rain. Then you've got this imperfect control, this influence bucket. And there it's like, well, I should understand what I can do to influence it, and I should engage with it, but understand that I have imperfect control and I don't determine it. And then there are the things you control, and you should 100% commit to those. And so the passivity argument is saying we should. Stoicism is telling us only to focus on the things we have perfect control over. That's obviously a problem. So if we update it to the trichotomy of control, there's the things we have perfect control over. There's the things we have influence over. We should care about those, but not get too upset if they don't go our way. And then we should not care about at all the things we have no control or influence over. And he uses the example of a tennis game, right, where you exert influence over the tennis game. You care, you try, but ultimately you don't want to be super angry if you lose because you don't have perfect control over it. So I think you can think whatever you want. Everybody gets to live the way they want to live, but this is a deeply unstoic view, and it's very dangerous in terms of leading, because it feels very close to Stoicism, but it's deeply, deeply unstoic, and it will lead you to a lot of unstoic conclusions if you follow the trichotomy of control. The reason Epictetus emphasizes the dichotomy of control is for the practical implications. There are certain ways we're supposed to treat and feel about the things that are up to us and not up to us. We're supposed to fear and desire the things that are up to us. Those are the things that are good and bad. And ultimately, Epictetus argues that's just our character. We can treat them different ways. We can act like they're the kinds of things that depend on us. We can act like they're the kinds of things that our happiness depends on. And then everything else we should only gently pursue. The things that are not up to us, we should treat them as external to us, as indifference, that some are preferred, some are dispreferred, but we treat them very differently. We recognize that they can't make us happy. And so adding a third category of influence, it doesn't even break up the dichotomy, because influence just falls into the category of things not up to us. I mean, basically my argument here is that you introduce a third bucket, but it's not really a third bucket. It's just a way of dividing up the already second bucket, which is the things not up to us, which is the result of the tennis match, the rain, the temperature, what other people think of you. And then you should go about kind of treating those on a case-by-case basis, and you should make decisions about the things that you influence. And you should make decisions about the things that you don't influence as well. You kind of treat them as they come. But it's only really, it resolves a problem that doesn't really exist, which is the passivity issue. There is no passivity issue, and so you don't need to make this third division. And I don't know what a third bucket of things that you would treat differently would look like, because you still have to apply to it the rules of the things that are not up to us, which is we don't get attached to these things. We don't think they make us happy, even though some of them are preferable and some of them are not. Yeah. Did that make? I feel like that got a bit broad at the end. But what did you think about that?
No, I think that makes sense. I think it gets broad because you have this third category that really is a part of another category of the dichotomy. So I think that's why things get a little confusing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the central point is just that there are things that are up to you, things that are not. And that's it for the Stoics. That's the upshot of that of that distinction, and it shows, and it matters because you're supposed to, as you say, desire those things that are up to you that are good, fear those things that are up to you that are bad. And for the Stoics, I suppose the point of this distinction then is just to laser in your focus on cultivating your character, focusing on virtue. And there's a nice passage from Marcus Aurelius that I think brings this out, from Meditations 449. Will then this which has happened prevent you from being just, magnanimous, temperate, prudent, secure against inconsiderate opinions and falsehood? Will it prevent you from having modesty, freedom, and everything else, by the presence of which man's nature obtains all on its own? That's from the George Long translation of Meditations. I think what that gets at, this question is did what just happened prevent you from taking accountability, responsibility, joy, whatever it is, and what is up to you? And Marcus Aurelius is reminding himself, no, it doesn't. And that's just a clean division of things that are up to you and things that are not. put another way.
Yeah, no, the point of the division is that that is the most fundamental and important division, and you can start dividing the things not up to you in all different kinds of categories. The Stoics do themselves with things that are preferred or dispreferred, or truly indifferent. But when you end up with three categories, first of all, it's not a trichotomy. But once you end up with more categories, you lose, as you were saying, the kind of laser focus or the intentionality of it. It's valuable because it's focused and because it's simple. And you should only make it more complicated if that's absolutely necessary. And this is not a necessary complication. It's not a. It doesn't change the Stoic argument, and so in doing it, it only risks kind of obfuscating or confusing the piercing insight of the Stoic argument.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, influence matters, but it comes into consideration when you're thinking about, what does justice look like? What does a good decision look like? And then you're sort of, reasoning through on a case by case basis
Yeah,
what it looks like to, do your best in a given situation.
yeah, totally. And I think that's exactly right. So moving on to the last one. The last one is the idea that the Stoics cannot be deterministic. So I'm kind of trying to go from simple to complex. This is, I would say, more complex. But also something I see a lot of people practicing Stoicism think, or somebody posts on the internet or in a discussion group that the Stoics were deterministic, and you get a bunch of people being like, no, the Stoics thought that you had control over your choices, and there's this kind of conceptual issue that goes on. So this misunderstanding is the idea that Stoicism can't be deterministic because this would contradict the dichotomy of control. So determinism is the idea that your choices and your behavior is predetermined if you could trace those causes and understand exactly how they interact with each other. And then some people think this, well, the dichotomy of control teaches you that your behavior is up to you. So that means that your choices are free. It means they can't be predetermined. But this is not exactly what the Stoics think. So the Stoics were compatibilist, which means that they think that free will and determinism can both be true and true at the same time. We did an earlier episode on this. That's because determinism means that all actions have an antecedent physical cause, which the Stoics believe. So everything, even our minds and souls, are physical and interact following physical laws. But free choices doesn't mean exists outside of this causal network. A free choice is just one that we are the cause of. So if someone controlled my body with a remote control, some sort of science fiction experiment, and made me do things, those are not my free choices. They are caused by the person with the remote control. But if I judge an insult to be a bad thing, I become angry, and then I hit someone, then that was a free choice because my character, my personality was the cause of it. If we go back to the cylinder example, if I'm a cylinder, so when I got pushed, I rolled. And so I was the one who determined that choice. I was the one responsible for it. And that's how the Stoics say we can have free will. They wouldn't necessarily use the language of free will that comes after the Stoics, but the Stoics talk about freedom. They say that we're free. If anything, they say that the actual virtuous person is more free because they're more self-determining. Your actions kind of originate from your beliefs and from your pursuit of virtue instead of external stimulus. The less virtuous person, someone bribes them or threatens them and they can be controlled. The virtuous person can't be controlled externally. They're only kind of generating their conception of virtue as they move through the world. So that's how they think free will exists, because they view it as, you causing your decisions. And then they also believe determinism exists. And so this again connects that idea of up to you. You see how this compatibilist view of free will fits very well to this idea. Well, something's free if it was up to you, and we think your behavior and choices are up to you. There's no real contradiction with determinism there. And so I think it comes from that misunderstanding again of what control means. I think control means kind of this total free will outside of determinism.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe someone just has in mind that in order for you to properly control something, then you need to be able to, select between different outcomes. for that thing, and sort of, people talk about like a garden of forking paths. The world could turn out this way, or it could turn out this way, and you're sort of exercising your control on, how you respond to a given situation. But I think that the central theme you're hitting on is that I think even though we use the term dichotomy of control, and control is a useful concept, I think it's you need to bring in these other ideas about what's up to you, and thinking through that doesn't necessarily have to do with these metaphysical debates about determinism, indeterminism, and what have you. We did do another episode, that was episode 93, where we did a deep dive into this issue in particular and how the Stoics thought about free will. So if you're interested in this issue, that's a good follow up, I think, if you haven't listened to that one already.
Yeah, because of its complexity, it deserves a little bit more detail. The argument here, I think, is, so that's a good one to follow up on. The argument here is that I think it comes back to the same thing. I think somebody gets an idea of the dichotomy of control in their head, and then it influences the way they think about when the Stoics talk about freedom. They kind of come in with that conception. So those were the four. Four misunderstandings of Stoicism that I think come from a misunderstanding of the dichotomy of control. One is the passivity argument, that Stoicism argues for passivity. Don't do anything. If it's not up to you, then don't worry about it or even think about it too much. Too much control. The Stoics think we can control our behavior immediately, and then that's either unrealistic or you're kind of failing to live up to Stoicism if you're not perfect after you read your first Stoic passage. Another idea is that the dichotomy of control, it's better to think about the DOC in terms of three buckets: control, influence, and no control. And then no determinism, which is the idea that Stoicism can't be deterministic because this would contradict with the dichotomy of control. And so the argument is that all four of those don't actually pan out when you kind of have a deeper understanding of what the dichotomy of control is saying. And some of those are criticisms. And then I think some of them in the trichotomy of control and the no determinism aren't really criticisms of Stoicism. I think they're just misunderstandings of people practicing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I hope that was useful if you're sort of wrestling with this idea of dichotomy of control, and maybe also useful for explaining the concept if you run across others who have questions or need clarification. So hopefully you've put this issue to rest with this episode, and Stoics can go forth and be happy taking responsibility for what's up to them, and including how they explain Stoic ideas to others. So that's our hope.
Yeah, get you in a perfect position to explain Stoicism to some unsuspecting victim. Watch out, you got some new tools. Awesome. Thanks, Gil.
Nice. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for listening to Stoic Conversations. If you found this conversation useful, please give us a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you use, and share it with a friend. And I'd like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. Do check out his work at ancientlyre.com, and please get in touch with us at stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback or questions. Until next time.